welcome to the Messianics Podcast, a podcast about all things Messianic Judaism. Each episode, we will be sharing our opinions as we tackle some of the biggest issues in Messianic Judaism. Now here's your hosts, Rabbis Eric, David, Jonathan, and Toby. Hey guys, thanks for joining us for another episode of the Messianics Podcast. Today we're going to do things a little bit different. We have thrown out some stuff on social media looking for questions and thoughts from our audience that you would like to hear us touch on. And so today we're going to dive into some of those questions. We're calling this what will potentially be a series of episodes, the Q&A with the Messianics Rabbis. And so as we dive into this, the first kind of series of questions that came through really deal with kind of the day-to-day functional aspect of ministry in Messianic Jewish congregations. And so these questions, this first batch of questions, come from Alan. So Alan, hopefully you're listening to this and don't skimp out on us on this one episode where we call you out. But no, these questions come in from Alan specifically, and he says, the first one out the gate is the professional lives of Messianic Jewish rabbis. How many have to be bi or even tri-vocational to provide for their families, and how many are able to draw a living salary for their congregations? And I can tell you offhand that this is an issue, a conversation that's kind of very near and dear to my heart, because I think it's one that is often overlooked or under discussed or what have you within the Messianic Jewish movement. And so before I share my thoughts on this particular question, I'm just going to open it up to the table and see where everybody stands on it, what everybody's thoughts are, and we'll roll from there.
Well, statistically, and I just looked this up the other day, 33% or 32% of clergy are bivocational across the board. But then there's another 20-something percent that lead more than one congregation. A lot of denominations will have one pastor that will lead more than one congregation. And in Messianic Judaism, we have several rabbis that lead more than one congregation. So when you put the 33% and the 20-something percent together, we're talking 50% of all clergy working at least two jobs, because to me, if you're leading two separate congregations, that's two separate jobs. You're doing the role of a leader or an executive in two separate entities. So then when we bring it to Messianic Judaism, there are very few Messianic rabbis that I'm aware of that are primary one vocational rabbis that don't work outside of their synagogue. So there is a real issue with that in some ways not. You know, we look and we say, well, should a rabbi have to work outside his home? Well, that depends on his congregation, where it's at. And understand that contrary to what you see on social media, the vast majority of rabbis and pastors don't live in mansions. They don't drive fancy cars. They don't wear expensive clothes. They don't do any of those things. Most leaders of congregations give more than they receive from their time, from their energy, from their tzedakah, their giving, their benevolence, all of those things. So it's important to understand that many congregations, the rabbi or the pastor of that congregation works a second job so that he can be a rabbi of his congregation and lead that congregation. So it's just important to note, most congregations, the vast majority are 70 or less people that attend that congregation. It's only about 3% of congregations in the United States that have more than 500 people. So when you look at it statistically, we're talking about a job in which a second job is almost a requirement statistically.
In my experience, let's see, I've been doing this about 20 years. So in 2005, it'll be 20 years. I think that it's gotten better and better. I've been at 3 congregations over 20 years, and my experience has gotten better and better as far as pay and salary. Some of that I think makes sense. Like, I think that I think you should pay your dues to a degree. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
I think to a degree. I think that you can't expect the world out of people who are laboring in ministry. And I mean, I remember one time me and Brooke were leading worship for a conference. I will not name the organization, nor I'll name the conference. And we spent the entire weekend leading worship for this conference. Friday night, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening. After the services were over, and Saturday evening, we were, there's always the prayer. And then Sunday, I think a couple times Sunday. And I remember a person walking up to me and handing me a box of Russell Stover's chocolates, saying, "I wish I had more to give you, but thank you.
Thank you for your service."
When I know that person was flown there and, got a suite and all these things. And I just remember, I didn't think anything of it at the time, because I think that oftentimes when we get into ministry and we're new, we're so wide-eyed and bushy-tailed that, I'll do it for free.
Yeah.
Well, you need to be careful with that, because some people will take you up on that. And some people will grind your bones into dust.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think my concern isn't so much... does that need to happen as far as being bivocational? Sometimes it does. I think it's important. I think that for some people it's every person's situation is different. I've been bivocational the entirety of my time in ministry. Now it's more manageable. I do mostly ministry and less bivocational. But previous 2 congregations, I was full-time in the marketplace, and I was really still full-time in ministry. I think the big problem that I had, though, was especially in the early years, and I was a school teacher, which will kill you by itself. I just remember, if you're a school teacher, you don't really have set hours. I mean, if things go bad, like as far as with discipline, or you got to call parents, or you have a faculty meeting, I mean, you'll be there at the school until 6, sometimes 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
And of course, schools have teachers do everything outside of teaching. Mm-hmm. Most of your time is really spent, And I remember one evening, it was during Sukkot, and we had this big Sukkot thing at this one congregation, and it was 6 o'clock, and I was still at work, and I got a text from someone in leadership saying, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm at work." And they were like, "Well, you need to get over here." And I'm like, "I don't get paid for what you need me to get over there for. This is putting food on, this is putting food on the table for me." I think that it's not whether or not people should be or can be bivocational. I mean, in a perfect world, they wouldn't be, It's how oftentimes I think people who are bivocational are oftentimes treated when they can't be, I guess, where leadership who isn't bivocational, if they're at if they're at that same place, like if the pastor or the rabbi is if they make enough money to just do that,
right?
And they expect. I think a big problem. I think I think what Alan brings up, I think, kind of blows the top off of, I think, a bigger epidemic, which is when you're in ministry and you're making a salary enough to just have that be your vocation, ministry, but yet you expect other people, your worship leaders and your lay leaders who are bivocational, like they have the same time and resources as you do.
Right.
And I think that that was a big reason why my wife and I left a congregation.
It's important that we, in dealing, there's a balance in this between the controlling element that some congregations have over their leader through finances. In other words, if you're a rabbi of a congregation and your congregation has the funds to give you a salary, but they want to limit your salary in order to have control over what you're doing. The other side of it is that there are congregations that have the resources that don't provide for like anything for their worship leaders or anything for different people that are part of their congregation. Now, I worked, and I still do things outside of being a rabbi. Now, I'm blessed. I actually get a salary that's, I could survive on from my synagogue, but I also teach classes. I also write books. I also go teach in other places and to increase what I have largely so I can have money more to give to other people and other ministries. But I know that there were times in my ministry as a rabbi where the congregation that I was leading had the funds to pay me more, but chose not to, in a means of sometimes controlling, sometimes having that power, the sway involved in that. The other side is that there are some congregations that just don't have the resources, and so it is something that you have to, if you're going to lead there, then you're going to have to do that. But there should be a understanding that if we grow to this point, if we get to this point, then your salary will be, and we are going to take care of you at that point, so you can make the choice to not have to work a second job or do other things in that way. And again, there's a lot in ministry, just like in Christian education. I've seen where the people that ran Christian schools, the people that were the administrators, made a good living, but the teachers didn't get paid much, but they were in ministry. So it was an understanding that, we're paying you less because this is your gift to God, doing this. And I've seen the same thing with people on staff in congregations or people that are worship leaders or whatever, where they're expected to sacrifice on behalf of the ministry, and again, that's something that sometimes people do with their rabbi. They're like, well, we could pay you more, but then you're not sacrificing for your ministry.
We're trying to make sure you're staying right before God by sacrificing more of your time and energy and money. And it's funny that so much of in the world of ministry, it's paying the pastor, paying the rabbi, and any other job, in any other career field, any other profession. Like, it would be unheard of to go, we don't pay the head engineer here. He sits up in his office and drafts and puts things.
It's a labor of love.
It's a hobby. He's not actually here to feed his family or anything. He's not paying off them student loans with our money. It's the only profession where we have this debate, and what kills me is it's in congregations, and again, this is not everyone. This is not, but for whatever reason, this becomes a problem in ministry, and which is to me, it's funny because you'll have communities of largely very conservative, capitalist-minded people who all of a sudden will turn like, oh no, this is socialism. This is supposed to be handout. We're just supposed to get from the rabbi. We're just supposed to get from the ministry free, everything. And so I'm like, well, wait a second. Like, they're putting in work. You don't expect to not get paid for your job or for the things you do. And these people are actively, especially as congregations grow. If you're doing a Shabbat message, if you're teaching Hebrew classes, if you're teaching a class during the week, if you're going and visiting with folks, in the hospitals and things.
Doing bar and bar mitzvah
doing
classes.
Bar and bar mitzvah classes. Yeah, you're actively. You are a teacher student. You are a teacher, counselor, mentor, comforter, all at once. And that's if I don't think you can expect anyone to do things for. Because again, we all admit there are congregations that just can't pay them, and that's we understand that there are congregations that you're barely cutting a rent check for the space you occupy for worship once or twice a week. But like, if you get a little more money, you probably should be fronting your rabbi a little bit of gas money, or something. If they're running around and visiting with, you and your congregants and going to the hospitals and things,
And to circle back to a previous conversation about the denomination versus the fellowship, if we were more denominational in our structure, then the smaller congregational leaders would be able to get a salary based upon a unified fund that was given into, so nobody had to go without having an adequate salary. And again, it doesn't have to be huge, but like I used to travel around, I still do, but I used to travel around and people would invite me to drive 4, 5, 6, sometimes 8 hours away, spend a night in a hotel, speak for a service or two, and then give me an offering which wasn't enough to pay for the gas money, and feel like they adequately provided for that. And I've seen rabbis whose families did without, who never go on vacation, who never have a break, who don't get taken care of by their flocks, that have the ability. Again, we're not talking about the groups that don't have the finances at all to do. But and the other side of that, by the way, is I know leaders who have their own businesses or are lawyers or whatever and lead a congregation also and never took a salary, so their congregations never learned their responsibility for their shepherd. So there's both sides of the equation where in some cases it's that the leader taught their people not to be giving and not to expect their rabbi to take a salary because he had enough assets of his own to survive without that. And that's not healthy either.
Right.
So I understand I just want to say, just to add this thought. I mean, I understand everything you guys are saying, and I understand how it can. There's a lot of different. Every congregation's different. And there's a lot of different moving parts, but and I'm sure all four of us have met someone who said that they don't believe in tithing.
Oh yes.
We probably have people sitting in our synagogues now that don't believe in it.
Oh, I know we do. That's why at CMC we have a few people that are not members because they don't believe in tithing.
And I think that it is, I can't use the word on the air, we'd have to cut it out, about but I'll say it's ridiculous. Because I'm like, you do understand that you're coming into this building, you're being fed, you're enjoying yourself here, and yet you're going to look at me and tell me, well, I don't think you have to tithe. And I'm like, dude, what is wrong with you?
But you think you have to keep Shabbat.
Yeah, but you think you got to keep Shabbat, and you're going to come and you're going to feed like the rest of us.
Right. Well, again, it goes back to that what I was saying. Like, and for whatever reason, it's only in like religious ministry circles. Like you'll have people who in every other aspect of life are like uber conservative capitalists. But then they become communists when they come into ministries.
Yeah, it's interesting because
some of them become fascist with how they run their pastoral staff.
Because these same people will pay for their children to have baseball lessons, football lessons, dance lessons, music lessons, art lessons, all those things, and have no problem feeling like the person teaching them or their children deserves a salary for doing what they're doing.
Right.
But when it comes to something as important as guarding your soul, teaching you how to draw near to God, those things, then that should be free.
So I don't want to spend all day dwelling on the one question because we do have a few more we wanted to get to that relate to this. But I do want to throw in. I feel like I have an interesting perspective on this particular discussion on this particular issue because I am a second generation Messianic rabbi. I grew up with my father as the congregational leader, as the rabbi. But not only that, I've worked in Messianic synagogues where I both got paid and didn't get paid. I have planted a Messianic synagogue and know all the sweat equity that goes into that, and so on. And I can tell you and it doesn't matter if it's Messianic Judaism or if it's in the church or what have you. If you were in ministry, in congregational ministry, vocational ministry, if you were in congregational ministry, as a pastor, a rabbi, a shepherd, elder, whatever you want to call it. It is a full-time gig, whether you like it or not. You're going to put 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week into that. Every single week. Either you're going to spend a few hours a day every day working on a sermon, or you're spend a lot of hours one single day working on a sermon, but you're still going to get those hours in. You're still going to have the hospital visits. You're still going to have the late night phone calls when somebody's having major problems. You're still going to have the situations arise where you have to go help somebody out on different issues. You're still going to have the situations arise where you have the last minute meetings at the office at the synagogue because there's a problem or something going on, or something needs to be repaired or fixed or whatever that you've got to go to address. And so if you have to work outside of your congregation as well, it's not the synagogue that's going to miss out. The congregation is not going to lose out. They're going to get their time out of you either way it goes. Right? That's just all there is to it. They're going to get their time out of you no matter what. And they should. Like, I'm not saying that that's a negative. Like, you shouldn't. But the reality is that when you have to work outside the synagogue, 1, 2, 3 jobs, whatever it is, generally speaking, it's your family that loses out. Because the synagogue is going to get their time, or the church, or wherever you're at, they're going to get their time out of you. And they're going to put in 30, 40, 50 hours a week in a job in the real world, so to speak. And your family's going to have whatever scraps are left over, which, by the way, is typically when you're asleep, right? Like when we started our congregation in Alabama here at CMC, when we started it, I was full-time with a synagogue in Georgia. And it wasn't getting paid great. I mean, it was pay. I wasn't working outside the synagogue, but I also didn't have the time to either, because they were very, for lack of a better way of wording, a little demanding on my time, which was fine. But I was the associate rabbi. I was getting paid full time to be there. My pay there was literally down to the dollar of what our bills were. Like, before we moved down, they said, okay, what do you think your bills are going to be? We gave them an estimated budget, and they said, okay, here's your salary. And I think we maybe had like 27 cents a month left over or something like there was no room for error at all. And then we left there to start the congregation here in Alabama. And I knew without a doubt that starting this congregation up, I was going to have to go back to work full time. And I'm a second generation Messianic rabbi. This is literally all I've ever trained for. I went to school for it. I have worked in various congregations across the country. This is all I've ever done. In terms of marketable skills available to the workforce, this is it. This is all I've got for you, and I don't have anything else. Like, I'm not a blue collar guy, though I love to pretend like I know my way around a motorcycle or a car or whatever. I don't know that stuff. Like, that's not my realm. But the one thing I did do for years is I worked in restaurants waiting tables, and you can do that with minimal education and do fine for it, right? And I was really good at it. So when we were starting the congregation, I knew I had to go back to work, but I needed a job that would allow me the availability to still be there for the synagogue, right? And the consideration wasn't, most of the time it wasn't, am I available for my family still? My family needed to eat. Whether I was available to go do stuff with them or not didn't matter. They needed a roof and they needed food, right? And so I went back to restaurants. And so I worked 4 days a week, open to close. I would show up at the restaurant at 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, whatever it was, and I wouldn't leave typically till somewhere around 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And then I would go home, I would sleep, and I would do it all over again. I did that 4 days a week, and I had Tuesdays available for the synagogue because Tuesday nights were Bible study. I had Friday and Saturday that I wasn't working, but I was at the synagogue dealing with stuff for that. And I did that for the first, 7 years of the synagogue. Consistently, constantly, and it's brutal. And my family took a hit on it because they didn't get to see me often. My kids were little, and so they didn't get to see me very much, and what have you. And when the time came that we were able to migrate to full time with the synagogue, it flipped everything upside down. Our lives were entirely different. We still weren't making like insane money, but we were comfortable. Things were fine. Bills were paid. And my kids got to know me. They got to have me around. They got to see me, which was a tremendous difference. I'm a fervent believer that there is a biblical obligation, a biblical mandate, however you want to word it, for the congregation to take care of their leadership, for the congregation to take care of their rabbis or pastors, whatever it is. I think it's necessary. I also think, by the way, and this is to what Rabbi Toby was kind of talking about earlier, I think there's also a mandate that you take care of those that serve in the congregation in important roles as well. I would love that we could give a stipend or a pay to everybody that serves in distinct roles in the congregation. And little by little, we're trying to implement some of that. But I think it's ridiculous to expect full-time work out of somebody and give them nothing. And that's what happens a lot of times too, especially in small congregations. Now, a small congregation is what it is. Like, you're starting from, when we started, I knew that the congregation didn't have money to pay us. Right? It was small. I mean, we started out with 10 or 12 people. We knew that they couldn't pay us, and we were willing to make the sacrifices as long as was necessary. To that point, and then I'll hand it over to you, Jonathan.
I was just saying that I wanted to add that either they can do that or they change their expectations for the rabbi and the synagogue.
Yeah.
So if someone comes in brand new, maybe they were Messianic before and you're the only Messianic synagogue local, and their expectation before was, a 3,000 person synagogue where you have Shabbat service, you have a Havdalah service, you have a Tuesday night or Wednesday night Torah study, you have, picnics and events every day, and the rabbi's leading all of it. But you're not willing to pay. If the congregation's not paying, either because they're not able or not willing, then your expectations have to change. And then he just becomes the Shabbat rabbi. That's it.
So First Timothy, Timothy and Titus are letters. First and Second Timothy and Titus are letters specifically for from Paul for kind of education or encouragement for leadership of congregations, and how congregations should interact with their leaders, right? Like, it's not just, hey, pastors and rabbis should read this and it doesn't matter to the average Joe Schmo in a pew. No, it's both ways, right? The congregant can look at it and know what to expect of their leader, and the leader can look at it and know what they should expect of their congregation. But 1 Timothy 5:17 says, the elders who lead well are worthy of honor and honorarium, especially those who work hard in the word and teaching. For the scripture says, you shall not muzzle the ox while he is threshing, and the worker is worthy of his wage. And I think Paul's laying a solid foundation there, and the concept is, honestly, in my opinion, based off the priesthood. Granted, none of us are pretending like we're Kohanim, don't get me wrong there, but there's no active temple serving standing today, no active priesthood working today. The community of Israel, all Israel, were required to give tithe and offerings to support the priesthood who ministered to Israel. And in the same sense, though the temple and the priesthood is not standing and active today, that doesn't mean that concept vanishes or that those commandments don't matter anymore, but rather we learn how to apply them in the situation we find ourselves in. And so congregational leadership is a necessity. They serve as the quote-unquote priest of that community to some degree, and there is an obligation to care for and provide for that individual and their family so that they can continue to serve you the way that they need to and are called to and should be doing so.
Right.
And I know that there's differing thoughts on this issue, and I know several Messianic rabbis that are very adamant that no, I should work outside my congregation, and my congregation, they can give me a stipend, they give me a little bit of this or that or whatever, but I need to be out there, and I need to do this and I do that. And look, I work outside the congregation right now, but it's really more for entertainment. I work at a coffee shop part-time because the owners are friends of mine, and they were opening a new one. This is their third store, and I went, hey, let's get back into this. I did it for a little while before. Let me come back in, and because it's entertaining. It's something to do. It gives me something to keep active and interact with you. But it also, oddly enough, it wasn't the intention, but it also markets the congregation in a lot of ways, because I have people that will come in and ask me questions about the synagogue or about Messianic Judaism or whatever, which is pretty neat. So.
And, like it or not, before we even get to the Levitical priesthood, before the Kohanim exist, Abraham tithes to Melchizedek, which sets up a pattern for, if there is someone who leads the community in worship of God and blesses those in the community, like Melchizedek does with Abraham, then, to some extent, there is a biblical pattern for them being deserving of some kind of tithe.
And before we jump to the next question, I do want to say on the inverse of this that the expectations of the leader should fit their congregation. In other words, one of the parts of the question was, do they get a living salary? Well, you can live much simpler than many people do if you need to. So if you have a small congregation that has a limited amount of resources and you want to be a full-time leader, then you need to lower the expectations of where you're going to live.
It's a good point. It does go both
how
ways.
you're going,
Right.
what you're going to drive, how you're going to dress, those kind of things.
Absolutely.
My wife and I waited 28 years to buy our first house because we led small congregations, and we knew that we could not afford a house, and so we saved money, we put money, we did things. It took us longer to do it, but we lived where we had to. Now, that doesn't mean we didn't eat and weren't clothed and didn't have a place to live, but we chose our lifestyle commensurate with the need of our community. Mm-hmm. So if you have a small congregation, don't expect them to provide you a condo on the beach and a Mercedes and all that, and then complain that they're not taking care of you.
Yeah, like I don't think that, like that Instagram account, the Preachers in Sneakers, you should look that up. It's pretty sickening what some of these guys wear.
Okay, something to hit on before we go that direction, just because this is a personal peeve of mine. A lot of pastors' salaries are public in those churches, and what you'll find, because people always want to hit on the pastors who what is it called, churches and sneakers or whatever, preachers and sneakers, and some of it is ridiculous.
Honestly,
like they have it's like okay, I've never needed anything of that cost, but like if you look at some of their salaries, they are not getting rich from their church. They're getting rich off of their books and their brand.
Either way.
And then we can argue whether or not they should have a brand like that or whatever. But
I think it's a optics problem for the kingdom.
Sure, absolutely. I would agree.
I don't think we're supposed to look like the world like that. And
Well, not only that, but you definitely should not, and this is a pet peeve of mine,
flaunt it.
I think if, for instance, if you live in our community or our communities, which are relatively similar, in our communities, the average person in our congregations, I think that should be how we should appear. Like, if your congregation, we live in a beachy area, right? And you guys do too. We live in a beachy area. Most of our congregation is going to show up in jeans and a polo shirt,
right?
Or maybe a little more dressed in khakis and a button down or something, right? But if you show up as the rabbi and you're wearing a $5,000 three-piece suit while everybody in your congregation is wearing jeans and a t-shirt, like it doesn't come across right. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't or can't dress nice, right? But you should represent the community you're in, not represent the community you wish you were in.
And I feel like I can say that because the most recent pair of brand new shoes I bought was at Walmart.
Yeah.
And before that, I think it was at Ross.
Yeah. Now, I do want to say, and not to be contrary, but to be honest, sometimes the leader that has those things were gifted those. For instance, I have 2 very expensive wristwatches. Now, if I wore one of those watches to synagogue and somebody judged me like a preachers and sneakers guy, they wouldn't understand that, first of all, I didn't buy those watches for myself. They were gifts. Right. Number 2, that I didn't use my salary. Right. It wasn't a show of what money I have. It's just a reality. Now, I don't wear my watches all the time. I do wear them sometimes. But I just want to be fair. There are times where nice things are gifted to leaders, and that to me is a different thing.
Different circumstance.
I think it has to be, if you're going to gift, I think, anyone something nice, not just a pastor or a leader, but I mean, look at Yeshua with the alabaster jar. The woman came and she broke the jar, and it was like a year's worth of wages. And there was people who were there and they were criticizing it, so that's wasteful. Okay. Me gifting a pastor a pair of, I don't know, Coachella shoes, is nothing compared to what that woman did for Yeshua, because she prepared him for burial.
Yeah.
And you know what else that people fail to, I think about is when Yeshua was on the cross, he would have still smelled the fragrance of that oil on him, which is so incredible. It was so special what she did. And it was a year's worth of wages. And people were like, what are you doing? He's like, no, stop. This is incredible what she's doing. This is right. Versus, wearing, whatever the heck,
But on the other side of that, again, Yeshua's clothing, now he only had one outfit that we know of. but it was the most expensive garment you could get of that day. It was expensive enough that the soldiers fought over it to get it. So I'm not saying like I would never spend the kind of money on myself that watch cost somebody that they wanted to gift me that watch. But at the same time, it was a gift.
Yeah.
And so all I'm saying is there are times when we rightfully look at somebody and say you're living above your means.
Sure.
And that money could be used for other things. And there's times where we make a judgment based on somebody driving a car or something compared to what the value of their congregants are. And we don't know the story behind it. Mm-hmm. And
we had somebody when I bought Danielle's car. It's a 2018 Toyota Camry that we bought brand new. It was the first brand new car we've ever bought, and probably the last one. I don't know that I'll ever do it again. But we bought it brand new because at that time we had a minivan, and the minivan was great. It fit our needs. The problem was the transmission was starting to act up, and it was getting really close to that line of nickel and diming you and not being worth it anymore. Right. So we decided we were going to get a vehicle. We actually were intending to get a used Camry because I had done some research and saw the safety standards of new Camrys and stuff. And so we went to the dealership to get a used Camry, and the one we wanted they had available, but they couldn't give us the deal we wanted on it. And so they came back and said, look, brand new ones just came out, like fresh on the floor. This was the first model of this new generation. Brand new ones just came out, fresh on the floor. We can get you the deal you want because of the rebates and so on in it. If you want to go this route, and we went, okay, cool, that's what we'll do. We'll take it. But it literally was the it's not the bottom line. Toyota has one model below it, but they really don't ever sell it. It's like the one that goes to like taxi companies and stuff. But it's bare bones and has nothing in it. But this one is the bottom line that they actually generally sell to the consumer market. And even in it, it's got all these cool bells and whistles and safety things and whatever. But it's like the base level. It's a 4-cylinder. Yeah. It does have an 8-speed transmission, which is great because it gets 40 miles to the gallon on the interstate, which is awesome. But we bought it. We paid $19,000 for it, and as a matter of fact, we'll have it paid off later this year, which is going to be great. Good. But we bought it, paid $19,000 for it, and we show up to synagogue with it, and somebody's like, "Oh, you got a new car?" She's like, "Yeah." They're like, "Oh, you must have it really good." And she was like, "What do you mean?" So you got a brand new car? It's like, "Yeah, but you don't know what I paid for it. Like, this is bottom line. This is super cheap. Like, I can't buy a used car right now for what I paid for this." Literally, we tried and we couldn't do it. And so, but yeah, sometimes people just have weird. And then the other thing for us, we were like, a Camry will last forever, and we have kids that are going to be driving before long, so it seems like a right idea. So, with that said, I do want to try to roll into and see if we can get this second question in to this episode, because I think it very much is tied into it. To this last discussion and is important for us to go on. So the second question that was asked is about Messianic Jewish synagogue finances. Should Messianic Jewish synagogues follow the typical 20th century church model of relying on tithing and donations as the sole source of the synagogue's income to cover the expenses and salaries of the staff? Could some Messianic Jewish synagogues take a page from some churches' playbooks and have for-profit arms like coffee houses, daycares, owning rental property, and engaging in other professional services? Should or could everything be replaced by a strict scriptural interpretation based on first century practices? I'm going to say, first and foremost, in my opinion, all those extra for-profit options that are available, I think for me, you have to very seriously weigh the liability risks into whether or not it's profitably worth it or not. So, for instance, a daycare. Love the idea. It's a great opportunity to kind of show love and be a ministry to the community and so on. But for me and our congregation, our leadership's talked about it in the past. For me and our congregation, severe liability concerns. I don't want to go near that. Like, that's the insurance factor, the risk factor, the fact that I have a buddy who's got a church near us. Their daycare, they had one person wasn't happy with the care that was provided to their kids. And they've got hundreds of kids that go through the day. They're on a wait list that's like 2 years long to get kids in the daycare. Whew. One family wasn't happy about something that happened one day, and they blasted them on social media. And I still don't know that they fully recovered from the image hit that they took from that one family. And so, I mean, just the liability factor. So that's just one aspect, and not just daycare. They all have liability. I will say that, and you guys are in a similar boat, we unintentionally had some extra revenue come into our congregation because, unlike most Messianic synagogues, we own our own property. You guys do as well. And so because we own our own property and we started from renting from churches, as you guys did as well, and I realized that an overwhelming majority of Messianic synagogues start in churches, renting from churches, don't have their own space. For us at CMC, it was important for us to sew that back into the body. Because it's not our kingdom, it's his. And so we have our own space. We don't use it on Sundays, and so for the most part. And so it seemed like a really good decision to open our doors up to rent to churches that are starting up or need space or whatever. So we actually have now, it's our third church that's with us, but this church is with us. They've been there for a few years now. Great people, really love them. The pastor's an awesome guy. But nonetheless, they've been with us for a few years, and so they pay rent to use our facilities. And now, obviously, a significant portion of that offsets the cost of maintenance and so on to the property. And then the same is true with our we have a school that rents from us, and that was a whole random thing that kind of was orchestrated, I think, by God's hand. And it has its own sets of difficulties and the circumstances sometimes. I know for Rabbi Toby and I in the office, it does when 3/4 of the year there's 150 kids screaming at the top of their lungs all day long, and we're trying to get stuff done, but that is what it is. And but we have a school that uses our space and rents from us, and so we have a couple of added revenue streams that were not intentional. They just kind of fell in our lap. That has been a tremendous blessing and helped offset the expense of the property and made it a little easier. Honestly, it made it where in a lot of ways, it made it where it was much easier for us to actually afford a salary for Rabbi Toby, because when we were bringing him in, I didn't want him to have to work full time. Like the original plan, it took us almost 3 years to get you guys here. Yeah, we were in works for almost 3 years, and originally the plan was that he was going to work in teaching still, and then COVID hit, and that year got nuts, and the year after didn't get any better. And so we went, okay, we want to make sure that you're not having to teach anymore. So it happened to work out that having those added revenue streams made it a lot easier to orchestrate a salary for Rabbi Toby. And our hope is to be able to make that even higher soon. But so he's got a part-time salary from the synagogue, and as he said, works part-time outside the synagogue with a really sweet, cushy gig.
Yeah, it's nice. It doesn't kill me, It's and it shouldn't kill you.
Not gonna lie, when he told me about that gig popping up for him, I was like, I'm kind of jealous. I mean, I don't want to do it, but I like the money on it. That's a good deal.
Yeah, and like CMC, Bridam, we have right now we have 2 congregations that use our building. One on Sundays and one on Wednesday. Now the Wednesday one is leaving next month. They've got to a place where they can get their own place to meet for Sunday and Wednesday. So we have that income coming in, and I can tell you that regardless of, because the debate on this is generally is going with outside income sources displaying a lack of faith of God's ability to provide from tithe and offering? And my answer to that is no, because regardless of where the income comes from, you're still depending on God to provide it through some resource. We've never looked at doing a daycare and those kind of things, or rental property. I have a friend in Jacksonville, or had a friend in Jacksonville, whose congregation bought a hotel. And it's like a Hampton Inn type hotel, and they actually employ people from their congregation that run the hotel, and then they get the resources from the hotel that helps fund their ministry. And I thought that was a creative way to do that. Now, would I want to run a hotel? I don't know that I would, and I'm grateful that I'm not having to make that decision, but I think that there are options. Coffee houses was mentioned. I think that's not a bad way. I know that there are other congregations that run off of that. And as Rabbi David said, he works at a coffee house. It's a great place to interact with people from the community, and have an opportunity to share. So those things. During COVID, we opened the Spanish Trail Craft Fair, which was actually just a way to let people from our congregation, when they couldn't work their jobs because they weren't allowed to go inside, for certain things to sell crafts and other things at our facility so that they could meet their needs and be able to make a little money. And we didn't charge anything for the ability to do that. We had the facility, so we made that possible. So there are times where I look and think, well, I wonder what we would do if we had that. I will tell you, I would love to be able to buy a couple of houses to rent to our senior single women. So almost like a Golden Girls kind of setup, because we have a number of single women that have their own homes or rent their own homes and are financially struggling a little to be able to do that, where if they had a home that they could rent together to share and share resources and be there for each other to help each other and all, I think that would be a plus. But I wouldn't want to do it as a profit maker. I would want to do it just to provide that kind of ministry resource to senior women and men, for that matter, not just women.
Yeah, I think it's. I don't think it's wrong. I think that we have to be wise. I think you have. It's one of those things where you have to look at it on a case by case basis. If it's, I don't think that there is. I don't think that making money in some way outside of the synagogue, like with the hotel or with the daycare, with the coffee shop, and I don't think that's wrong at all. I think that that's fine. I just think with any situation, you just have to practice wisdom. I remember years ago, there was one of the congregations I attended, this one guy had this idea with this multi-marketing scheme, which we all know is pyramid scheme, multi-level marketing, right?
Yeah.
AK pyramid scheme.
Well, it finally dances the line, and sometimes they cross over and they get in trouble. Like I remember. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry,
No.
You're right.
Saying I remember years ago, a guy had this idea or had connected with someone who was already a part of this thing, and with this multi-level marketing thing, and they had a meeting. And I was new to the synagogue at the time. So I didn't really know much about it, and I was flat broke all the time anyway. I mean, literally, I'm walking around with like $15 to my name,
right,
because I was still in college.
I have $3.
Right, literally, just I had enough gas money just to make it there and make it home. But apparently some people started making like a lot of money off of it, like for real. And then the whole thing just bottomed out. Imploded. And next thing you know, there was court cases and this, that, and the other. And it was a whole thing, but so that's an example of how you have to be careful, But I'm just saying that ultimately, to answer the question, I don't think it's wrong. I just think that I've seen it done right, and I've also seen it done really stupidly.
Right. Part of me wonders if there's a way to, because members and people who attend your congregation are present for your sermons and your teachings. But part of me wonders, could congregations, if they really needed to, could you convert teachings, like especially like long teaching series, into like DVD sets, or downloadable packages that then you could sell outside of.
I've told him to do that with his 6-week Hebrew course that he does. I've told him to package it and because now to a different angle, like he does it, it's one of his extra income streams in essence. Right. He does it, he charges for the course. I told him to pre-package it and give it to other rabbis,
right,
for them to do the same thing and model in there. I mean, you could also sell it, but to model it so that they could do it. Now to the end of the added businesses, like we knew there was a church that we used in Tallahassee because we were starting a group there. There was a church we were using there that was bordering on a mega church. They were a couple thousand people. It was bordering on a mega church, but they were getting ready to figure out how to get their own property, and this big box store went out of business. The building looked like it was like a Circuit City or something, but either way, this big box store went out of business, and it was part of this whole strip mall. So they bought originally the or took the lease of the big box store, and there were like 2 units next to it. They took the lease for those. They retrofitted the whole place. I mean, made it look really nice. Did a really good job of it. Retrofitted the whole place to fit their needs. And then a year or two later, the whole strip mall came open for sale. So they bought the whole strip mall. And there were probably another 15 or 20 units in it, and they were all fully leased.
Wow.
And so the church basically started its own real estate firm or investment, whatever, that operated it, but those funds were to support the church and the missions work that they did and so on. Now, the only complication was it was a church that taught that drinking was a sin, and there was a bar that had been there forever, and so they had to figure out how to justify making money off of the bar that was in there. But either way, and so what ended up happening was, because then they became the management firm for this the strip mall, they were able to then provide jobs for some of the people in their congregation to work maintenance and so on. But the same could be true if you were to open up a coffee shop, or you'd open up which in both of our areas, the coffee market's kind of saturated. It's not really a beneficial thing to do.
Well, and the sad thing about it is, if we opened up one, it would still be rather successful.
Probably.
Because people are just that obsessed.
Yeah. And so if you opened up a coffee shop, or you opened up a bagel shop or whatever, a kosher deli is one of the things I'd love to do, or a kosher style deli is one of the things I'd love to do.
We'll name it Almost Kosher.
Yeah, Almost Kosher. But if you open something like that up, now you're able to provide jobs for. Now you got to be real careful that it doesn't become like Yellow Deli type of thing, where it's are you guys familiar with the Yellow Deli?
I'm not.
Have you ever? Oh, you got to look it up. So the Yellow Deli, there's several of them all around the country, but there's one in like North Alabama, like Birmingham area, something like that. It's actually a business operation of this like legitimate cult. And they're a quote unquote Sabbatarian cult. And it's this legit, like the FBI are like actually monitoring their actions at all times kind of cult. And but they operate these Yellow Delis. There's 6 or 8 of them, something like that. And there's documentaries about it. It's great. But the Yellow Delis are how they, like, it's all their people that are part of their cult that work there. And everywhere that they're at, everybody's like, yeah, the food's good. The people are weird. We're not really sure about the people. The food's good. We just keep eating the food. We just won't do anything with the people.
Right.
But yeah, it gives opportunity to give employment to people in your congregation, or to help support the community by giving employment to people in the community.
Right. So as we get ready to wrap this episode up, I wanted to say that if a congregation does start some kind of a for-profit wing, they should do everything they can to keep in mind that ministry is supposed to be the primary, mm-hmm. and sometimes things can become so overwhelming that it overwhelms the ministry and becomes more important, more times done, all that. The other thing is, in addition to Rabbi Tobia's statement about multi-level marketing, mm-hmm. I have made it a point to never get involved in one of those, not because I don't think they're a valid way to make a living or any of that, but because I don't want people in my congregation to think that the reason I'm coming to visit them is because of whatever it is I'm selling at that time.
You want to buy some death sticks?
I mean, years ago I did get involved in one of those things for a short time, but since then...
He's covering hide because he saw me looking at him. What he's saying, I made it a point to never, and I'm looking over and he goes, oh yeah, you remember that.
My wife has done Mary Kay and a couple of things, but I made it a point in ministry not to not do that, because... when you go to talk to somebody, if you go to visit somebody at their house, you don't want them to think you're trying to get them to buy whatever it is, or to become your down chain person, or whatever it is in those things. There's nothing I'm saying against those things, but I don't want those lines to be crossed. And it's the same thing if we owned a coffee house, or we owned a real estate business, or something that was feeding the receipts into the synagogue to help pay the building. It's easy to get to where your primary becomes, how do I make more money so that we can do more ministry, rather than how can we do more ministry. And so I just want to say that while these things can be good, they also can be problematic if not carefully and prayerfully operated. So anyhow, we thank you, Alan, for your questions. We have a couple more questions from you and from others that we're going to do on the next episode. And if you have any questions you'd like us to answer, you can reach us through our Facebook page, Messy Antics, and give your questions there, and we'll try to answer them on an upcoming episode.
Thank you for listening to the Messy Antics podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you can be notified every time we drop a new episode. And be sure to follow and interact with us on social media at Messy Antics Podcast.